I'm in such a good, joyous film noir style mood, and we literally just want to do a video talking about a video game called Nobody Wants to Die. Something that I've been looking forward to for the last few months, and I feel like it's blowing up right now. However, the reason why is kind of linked to how ghostly the marketing was. Like, it was shown off at the Future Game Show. It initially had a reveal trailer back in March. I should also say I'm Scott Hill, that is Josh Brown.
Hi.
I needed someone to talk about this. And yeah, I've only played about an hour, maybe an hour and a half of it so far. It's absolutely gorgeous. And I kind of want to run a few things down. But like I said, the marketing is the initial thing, because for the longest time, I thought they were trying to hide a turd or trying to hide something that would be a lot more negative. And even when it came out, there weren't reviews on launch day. It went live last night or a couple of nights ago in the UK, and it was only £18. And I was like, is this all just smoke and mirrors? Like, is this all just like one big tech demo? It's going to look absolutely beautiful, and it's only £18 because it's going to be over in half an hour or whatever it is. And so far, no, that's not the case. There are obviously more reports now as to the more reviews getting out there, but not too many. But a few people who have already finished it saying it comes in at about 6 to 8 hours long, which is about the same as Still Wakes the Deep, even though I think both of us finished that in a shorter amount of time. But I wanted to touch on that, the fact that it's weird choosing to not market something like this at all unless they really wanted to protect the story. And I'll get into it in a little bit without any spoilers. But what do you think of the whole way it's rolled out? Because it's been like 2-3 months with very little out there.
Yeah, totally. I mean, I can kind of understand it because it seems like a small scale production, and though you probably wouldn't get that just by looking at the trailers because they are so beautiful and it looks lush, and it's crossed over in an interesting way. Like, we've had for instance, Adam Nicholas from What Culture Wrestling in The Office, who is a gamer but isn't like in the ecosystem like you and I are, Scott, like constantly watching trailers and stuff. He spoke to us in the office and was like, have you guys heard anything about this game, Nobody Wants to Die? We were like, oh, that's interesting. That's kind of crossed over in that way. But it has just come out of nowhere, like you said. It's one that I've been looking forward to because I thought the concept looked really cool. And of course, graphically, it looks absolutely like full of splendor, but it hasn't even had a Wikipedia page. I don't even know if it still does, but if you go on if every time, as we do, when we're checking what's coming out, like I always go on the Wikipedia for Video Games 2024, and that hasn't had a blue line next to it all year. But it is encouraging that people are getting hands-on, and you have great things to say. I've been looking on Reddit threads this morning, and it seems like the people who are playing it have great things to say about it, which is really cool. And I want to hear more about it because I feel like we did a podcast on video game marketing the other week, and I feel like we've had so many games like this year that seem to just come out of nowhere with very little marketing, and everyone who plays them are like, have you played this game? It's so good.
Yeah, and I'm just like, I'm curious how this all goes going forward. Like the idea of, because the assumption is you don't have any marketing going in, the thing's going to bomb, and there are so many layoffs and so many stories doing the rounds of projects that didn't succeed. I mean, even as we started to record this, there's just the story doing the rounds about how even NetherRealm was suffering layoffs. Obviously, Mortal Kombat developers, and the most recent Prince of Persia didn't sell very well, things like that. But Nobody Wants to Die is this huge showcase of Unreal tech. It's all on Unreal 5. It's the first game. It's from a new developer called Critical Hit. We're not sponsored by them whatsoever. I'm just gushing about something I love. I love cyberpunk stuff. I love Blade Runner. I love all the vibes that this thing has. And in a way, them steering away from the marketing only works in its favor, because as soon as you start playing, you realize how well thought out the entire world is. Like, this is a detective story. You're playing as this dude called James Carra. I guess I'm not going to do spoilers. I'll just do the outline kind of thing. But it is kind of gruff noir fiction 101. Like, you have a disgraced detective who's to one more case. He's got one more thing to do, and he's partnered with a young rookie. And it kind of just goes from there in terms of him trying to solve the murder of someone who appears to be like a figure of power, let's say. But it's the way the world's laid out, where the actual art direction has way more in common with something like BioShock. And I wasn't expecting that at all. Like the framing of the world, the actual the basic part of the lore is that people transfer their consciousness into another body when they're about to die. It's like written into legislation. So the US legislation has changed, and there's the Declaration of Immortality instead of the Declaration of Independence, which has been amended, and people get signed into this thing, so everyone just lives forever. So the idea of old school Art Deco art styles, art directions just permeate in the city. So you still have a cyberpunk look, a Blade Runner-y look, but the cars are like 1940s mafia style floating versions of those cars. with sort of pin-up girls and like those kind of dresses and like noir tropes from the actual time of when something like the Maltese Falcon was doing the rounds, but it's all in this future world. It's just so well done. I think you have to kind of leap through a few hoops to be like, well, surely culture would move on, but whatever. Like the boomers have been in control for 100 years or 200 years, and that's just what we have. But it's so strong, and it's like, yeah, like I think that in itself, having such a confident lore in a world where you can pick up all these different documents and read stuff about it, is awesome. But I think the thing you'll love is the L.A. Noir-ness of it, and like I've been one of the biggest critiques of L.A. Noir. Like I think that game is an absolute mess, but I always appreciate what they were going for. It's the execution that I didn't like. One of the oldest things me and you recorded was a chatty face on that, yeah, back in 2016 or something. But if you like the vibes of L.A. Noir, where you're slowly uncovering a case, quite a dark case in regards to, you know, something that's happened to the victim or whatever, and you've just got really low string sections playing underneath you, like just this really atmospheric, phenomenal tone, that's what really comes through. Like I said, I've only played the first crime scene, which is about the first hour or so of the game, but I'll talk about gadgets and how you do that in a little bit. But I guess the Alien Noir comparisons are interesting.
Speaking my language, Scott Telford, I've waited my entire life for something that scratches the Alien Noir itch, and unfortunately we haven't really got it yet. But you sent me the score this morning, for instance, and I already the vibe that you're describing, I can't wait to play it myself. You know, you mentioned this sort of retro futurism element where you have this kind of these noir-esque conventions and noir-esque iconography in a cyberpunk setting. That does a lot for me, as you know. Like I like cyberpunk, but I'm a bit oversaturated with it recently. Cyberpunk 2077 was kind of my tipping point where I was like, okay, I feel like I've done that now, and everything else sort of feels like a bit of a pale imitation of that, even though obviously cyberpunk itself is indebted to so many of the elements of fiction, you know, that came before, not to mention the actual thing it's based off. But this like mix of elements speaks a lot to me. But for me, going into this game, I was already confident in the presentation, if that makes sense. That was the one thing I assumed that it would get right, even if it messed everything else up. So I guess what I want to know is it more than just that set dressing? Does it actually have a mechanical core to it that's satisfying beyond just the storytelling that it brings to the table and the presentation and the aesthetic, I suppose? Yeah,
it's so far like there's dialogue choices. There's a couple of different things where you're making choices on the case in terms of like maybe you want to hide a bit of evidence, which will then affect the conversation you're having later. It's only been a couple of times, and it hasn't been like the game's telling you Telltale style, like this is going to affect the story overall. But you're choosing how you want to talk to a couple of people that are in your ear, kind of thing, when you're on the case. So there is a bit like that. In terms of the meat of what you're doing, it is uncovering, at least in the original, the first level, it is this big old crime scene, which is the things that have been in the trailer. But I love the way they've thought out the gadgets. Like it is kind of like what if Sherlock was in the year 2200 or whatever, where you've got the magnifying glass, but it has like an X-ray filter to it, or like you're using like this reconstructor thing to rewind back time, kind of literally what Thanos does, like just moves the hand, everything goes back, kind of thing. And you can see what's happening in regards to the body or whatever that you're looking into. It is I can see people, maybe a criticism would be that it's on rails. Like you can make it tell you where to go. You can hold a button for a hint. And so it's very easy to do that. But I did also find that I could deviate away from the critical path and go explore the wider environment and find little clues and bits of info about the victim or whatever as well. So I don't mind that necessarily, because I don't think they were, even though the pop-ups are telling you how to use the gadgets over and over again, even when you're exploring, I'm like, dude, just let me, I get it. I hold R2, it's fine. But
there's
at the same
a trace
time,
there, by the way, just like right next to you, being like, "Hey, Scott, you need to use this gadget." Hey,
it hasn't so far. There's not been a quippy sidekick in person, but there is someone over the comms. But you can choose how you want to talk to them as well. But yeah, I think that the general presentation, like obviously it's a graphical showcase, and because you have this reconstructor thing that you can rewind, like see, it's all based on the pressure of the triggers. So if you want to move stuff in ultra slow mo, you can, which I love slow motion. Nowhere near enough games let me do stuff in slow motion. That's why I love RoboCop so much last year. But they definitely have designed a set of systems to just drink in the graphics. It still is primarily an Unreal 5 showcase.
Nice.
But I do find that if you do a certain tone with enough conviction, you can punch through a lot of the tropes. Like, the idea of like, oh, we're going to do Blade Runner 101, we're going to do noir fiction 101. And then, we have the disgraced cop, the way he's talking is, like, And it's like I said, he's like talking about the city and oh my god and whatever. I love that stuff. And like I said, I think you can do that with enough conviction. But like you said, it is up against the fact that it is one of the most played out genres at the minute.
Like you said, though, I feel like as long as in my head, the story comes first and informs the genre rather than the genre coming first, if that makes sense. Like, a lot of people might just wake up and say, I want to make a cyberpunk game. And it's like, yeah, but what do you want to do with that genre? How do you want to use the elements of that fiction to your advantage? And this does seem like it is doing that in a way that, you know, like you said, is more than just kind of set dressing. And the mechanics themselves and the abilities sound like they have more depth than what I was expecting. Because, again, one of my, not worries, but wonders pre-launch was whether or not this was going to be more of a straightforward walking simulator. So the fact that you have these decisions to make at all points towards a more complex experience than I was expecting, you know, for better or worse. I guess we'll see how that shakes out at the end of the story, but...
Well, yeah, there was a couple of things as well where, like, I chose, you know, that whole thing in certain games, kind of like in Fallout 4, where you're not always sure what the dialogue is going to do, like sarcasm button, whatever.
Yeah.
There was one thing with a file of evidence where my options were burn it or put it back down. And I was like, well, can I not just keep it and use it later for, like, something? And I chose one of those options, and then which wasn't what I thought it was going to be. And then the way that it played out, my character did then say the thing that I wanted, and I was like, okay, thank God you've thought this through in a way that like makes more sense.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think, like I said, the main takeaway for me is that they like largely stayed away from doing over marketing for it. There were a couple of gameplay trailers. There's an interview with the team, because this is an Embracer published thing as well. Which obviously they're footing the bill on how absolutely gorgeous it all looks, even though it's on Unreal 5. And it seems like that's worked in their favor. And like, to me, it's an extension of the conversation we had about like video game marketing is dead in regards to you don't necessarily need that huge build up, and you can get by on word of mouth. But I'm just curious, like, you know, your beloved Pacific Drive, I saw a stat yesterday, that's now hit over 600,000 copies.
Yes.
And like, that was barely talked about. And it is interesting. Like, it feels like video game marketing or video game projects are like on a precipice every time now. If word of mouth's strong enough, they fly. If not, they completely die off. But we're right in the middle of it seems like a transition period away from the way things used to work.
Yeah, 100%. It's been a very interesting year in that regard, because we've had, I mean, we just found out the other day that in the UK at least, The Last of Us 2 Remastered is the second highest selling game of the year, which even as The Last of Us, you know, diehard, completely blew my mind, because I wasn't expecting that at all. So you've got that in second. You've got Helldivers 2, which was a surprise hit, in number one. You know, we talked the other week about the likes of Palworld blowing up in terms of sales, and all of these games that can live or die kind of on word of mouth, or at least on, you know, exposure outside conventional reviews or coverage or whatever it is, or even conventional marketing, like having your game be at a big showcase or whatever. It feels like that sort of sense of community and that sense of word of mouth is so integral in making a game a success these days, and you kind of hope that games like this that are deserving of it in terms of quality manage to attain that, because, you know, there's been some games, even from this publisher this year, that have released that I've really enjoyed that haven't managed to maintain any kind of momentum sales-wise or even popularity-wise, and then that's resulted in, you know, some of the staff having layoffs or studios shutting down entirely. I mean, my beloved System Shock remake, which came out last month on consoles, I absolutely adored, and that just came and went. Like, you wouldn't even really know that a System Shock remake was available on modern consoles and PC, and that's like such a shame, because it's such a great game and an underrated gem of the year. And I feel like so many titles this year have been destined to kind of go down that route, and you just kind of hope that in this era of, you know, first weekend sales mattering so much, that they can have that kind of tail to them and manage to pick up speed and steam kind of as the years go on, if they deserve it, like it sounds like this does, even from this early first impression. And, you know, we even said that this game's like, what, 18 quid, did you say? Like 18,
I think there's a 10% off thing, but it's 18 pounds right now. Yeah.
Even then, though, even if it's like 20 or even 25, you know, it's a game that looks interesting and doesn't have that huge barrier to entry of full price. Like, again, we mentioned it, but so many of those titles I've taken a risk on this year and thoroughly enjoyed as a result. You know, Crow Country for 15 quid before that. And I think there is something appealing about games like this, which have a unique concept or do something a little bit differently, that get you interested, and then the buy-in price is so lower compared to everything else. You hope. I want this game to succeed, not just because it sounds good, but because it kind of proves that model works, and I want that model to work. I really do.
Same, and it's just like, yeah, I mean, my beloved Prince of Persia, like the best thing Ubisoft have done in years, barely sold, or at least it's slow. It's selling very slowly. But yeah, I feel like the marketing side of it is in this weird transitional state, and see how all things land. Because if word of mouth is now king, which it kind of always was, but there was all that thing, you know, E3 reveals, Summer Game Fest reveals, whatever it is. But the thing with this game as well is that, like, the thing I want to end on is that, like, the way that it's all presented, it is this big Unreal 5 showcase, and there's a phenomenal visual reveal near the beginning that's absolutely stunning. Like, they really worked on this really specific camera angle that they're going to give you for this thing, and it's great. I wonder if there'll be comparisons to something like Hellblade 2, which, like, obviously I was massively critical of, because I just thought that thing was such a slog, and all it had was graphical presentation. I already feel like there's more gameplay to this. But it is part of that conversation, not to make it about graphics gameplay, but I'm curious if that comes up again, if people want a bit more choice or a bit more ways to solve crimes and things like that, when this is so overtly. And one of the reasons it's doing so well word of mouth is like, oh my god, look at that, like it looks next gen, it looks unbelievable, and I wonder how those things kind of land. But yeah, at the minute, absolutely love it, and I'm gonna devour it as soon as possible. I don't imagine it'll be much longer.
Dude, honestly, man, like, I feel like this year has made it really easy putting together the most overlooked games list. You know, like you mentioned, Nobody Wants to Die Now, Pacific Drive earlier in the year, just playing Still Wakes the Deep recently. Like, all of these games that are under an onslaught of AAA games that are definitely worth people's time. It's as we keep saying, it's a bad year for the game industry, but it's a paradoxically great time to be a gamer, because you've never had more choice and there's seemingly never been more quality out there to choose from.